Now, I think it's safe to say that many of us have heard infamous characters throughout time, such as your Jack the Rippers, H.H. Holmes, Adolf Hitler, Winston Churchill, people who are historical in nature. But how many people have heard of famous or infamous family members as a group, such as 5, 6, 7 members of one family? Families who may have scared and terrorised neighbourhoods, towns, villages, cities. Now, today's story has brought us here to St Nicholas Church in Newchurch, just outside of Rawtenstall. And we're going to take you guys with us, and we're going to look for the grave of one person, and that person is Ellen Caygill. And she was the head member of the Kegel clan. Now, when I was a young child, in my early teens, we had 2 families that we all had heard the stories and tales of. Now, I'm not going to name those names, those families, because I'm not too sure if 1 or 2 of them are still knocking about in our neck of the woods. Yeah, indeed, we had 2 families. Now, the tales were that they never got on. There was a kind of a rivalry between the 2 families. And every so often you would hear tales of fighting breaking out in pubs and the bars and the restaurants in and around Hasland and Helmshore, in Bacup, in places such as Rawtenstall, where we are today. So these stories and these type of urban legends, if you will, they've been going for many, many years. And indeed, so in today's tale, we're going back to the 1800s. And the tale of the Kegel family. Now, the Kegel family lived just in that direction in a place known as Bridleway. I think it was Bridleway Lane. And you had Peter and Ellen Caygill. Now, they married around about the 1840s. I think it was about 1846. And together they had a pretty large family. I think they had 8 or 9 children between the pair. Now, it was the children and the father, Peter, especially, who were well-known troublemakers in and around these neck of the woods. And they struck fear into the hearts of these places, you know, in the pubs, the inns, the bars, the taverns. And they didn't care who they upset. Now, a lot of it, I wouldn't say it was on par or on level with the Shelbys in Peaky Blinders, nothing to that extent. But they were, what's the word I'm looking for? They were kind of, there were people who, if they walked into a bar, into an inn, such as places here in Newchurch, people would quickly drink up and leave because they just knew that trouble wasn't far behind these people, these Kegel members. Now, like I said, you had Peter. He was the father, he was the husband, and he himself got into a lot of trouble with the police, mainly for drunken, disorderly behaviour. But then you had his son, Frank. Now, Frank was the worst of the lot. He would be accused and he would be arrested and he would be convicted of actually bodily harm on many people in a 10 to 15 year spell. As for Ellen, and this is the lady we're going to talk about today, she was like the head of the clan. She was the leader of the wolf pack, if you will. But funny enough, Ellen never ever got into trouble with the police. Now, as I was saying, Ellen and Peter had a large family. Ellen herself always maintained the household, maintained order to some aspect. She always made sure that she had a roof over the head for her children and obviously her husband. But she must have been worn down by all the trouble that was being brought to her front door. Like I said, Peter, her husband, always known for being drunk and disorderly. But the thing is with Peter, her husband, he was a shoemaker by trade, so it was highly thought of in these neck of the woods. But he just liked the drink. Now, her son Frank and another son who she would later give birth to as he got older, called Thomas Henry, Now, Thomas, Henry and Frank, like I said, they will become the worst of the family clan, if you will, for going out and causing actual bodily harm on innocent people who just wanted to be in the pubs, having a few drinks with their friends, minding their own business. But Frank and Thomas, they just saw it as power. It was like a power trip to them. They wanted to be the top dogs here in Newchurch and over in Waterfoot. Now Ellen, she put up with this for many years. I think over a sustained period of about 20 to 30 years of constantly trying to defend her son's, her husband's behaviour. And like I said, there's no records of Ellen I should say, ever being arrested by the police. We can't find any records whatsoever, whereas the rest of the family, it's two to a penny kind of thing. Every time you look in the old newspaper archives, one or more of her family or her sons would be mentioned. Now, when Peter passed away in 1877, Ellen was left pretty much alone, and obviously her sons were frittering away money left, right and centre by constantly spending it in the alehouses, in the inns, taverns. She was finding it really hard to maintain a roof over her and one of her other children's heads, and I'll put the name of the child down below. I can't actually remember who she was living with at the time. But in 1891, on the census records, she'd moved to somewhere called the Nuttall's Buildings. I'm not quite sure where that is. Bridle Way is over in this direction, where she'd lived for between 20 and 30 years with most of the family. But when Peter died in 1877 and in 1891, census records show Ellen with one of her sons had moved to somewhere called the Nuttall's Buildings. So if anybody knows where that is, on they may have some old photographs of that, can you please contact me? But in 1891, like I said, she'd moved. She was finding it very difficult to maintain a roof over her head. So she ended up hawking as a profession. Now, hawking, to many people, it was seen as just one step away from destitution. It was that bad of a job, but it wasn't as bad as working in the workhouses. So she turned to hawking to try to raise money. And it would be hawking which would ultimately become Ellen's downfall. Now, Waterfoot, back in the mid to late 1800s, it used to have its own train station, and I think even into the 1900s there was a train station there, and it was there that Ellen would try to sell her wares. Now, she used to sell fruit and vegetables, but it was a job where she literally had to walk around. She had to try to sell as much as she could just to raise money to put food on the table and to pay for the rent, so she had a roof over her head. It was a difficult and at times forlorn job. Now, she'd done this job for about 10 to 15 years, and she struggled, but she was out daily from the early hours in the morning till the mid-afternoon, late evening. But she went to Waterfoot Station because that is where obviously passengers on the trains were coming and going, so there was more chance of selling, like I said, her products. Now, obviously back in the 1800s, as we all know, health and safety was non-existent. It was just a case of make do and get on with it. But hawkers, and especially over in these neck of the woods, they're always told to shift and to move on, you know, not block passengers' rights of ways, don't get in the way of people. And many a time Ellen herself had been told to move away from Waterfoot Station, from what we've read and what we've been researching. But on one morning, just before 8 o'clock, Ellen would suffer a fatal fall. And with that fall, it will bring a kind of closure and an end to the terror and to the turmoil that the Kegel family brought to these neck of the woods here in Newchurch. Now, as we were saying, her husband Peter passed away in 1877 and he was buried on the 13th of February. And now, you know, this had a massive impact on Ellen, and yet despite her children who were now working within the mills, and like I said, money was being spent on alcohol and other vices. So instead of her sons helping her pay the way, they were just leaving their mother Ellen to basically get on with it and do it all herself. Now this obviously led to many arguments within the house, and these arguments at times would become abusive. And like I said, her son Frank, he had become a massive liability. Like I said, he was being arrested for being drunk and disorderly, as well as causing actual bodily harm. And he would rack up many convictions soon after his father passed away in 1877. Now, it was just prior to 8 AM on the 19th of May 1897, and Ellen had made her way, as she had done on numerous occasions, to Waterfoot Station, like I said, to sell fruits and vegetables. Now, the street traders were already out and about. Some of the market stalls had been set up, obviously filled with fish, fruit and veg, you know, and other consumables. Now, it was when Ellen was passing just one of these many stalls, and she was completely oblivious to all the hazards that obviously lay in wait. You know, food, rotten food that had been spilled onto the pavements, onto the sets, the cobblestones. And she was completely oblivious as she made her way slowly along these old pathways. Now, Ellen slipped on some orange peel that had been discarded by the public, by people who had been buying the produces. And the fall itself was so severe that Ellen, she went over with such force, she broke one of her legs. But most worryingly and alarmingly, she badly fractured her skull. Now, nearby was another market trader by the name of James Turner, and he quickly went over to offer his assistance. Now, obviously, Ellen was in a lot of pain, but he helped her up and he put her onto, I think it was something called a spring cart, and he helped her back to her home, and a doctor was soon called for. A local doctor came and attended to her injuries. But like I said, her fall was so severe that the doctor had no choice but to send her to Manchester Infirmary. So they placed her on a train at around 8:20 AM that morning. Upon arrival, all the beds had been taken up. There was no beds available for Ellen. So the nurses and the staff, they sent her to nearby Ancoats Hospital, where she would spend the next 3 or 3.5 weeks before sadly passing on Wednesday the 16th of June 1897. Now, Ellen Caygill was interred here at St Nicholas's Church, and her headstone is 274. Now, we've been looking for it while we've been retelling her sad tale, and if we look just in front of us, we have some small headstones. Now, we have to bear in mind that Ellen at this point, she was pretty much destitute. She was an extremely poor woman, and even though she had a big family, I personally was kind of expecting a pretty decent headstone, maybe with several names. Now, I'm not sure if she's buried alongside her husband Peter, because like I said, he died in 1877, but we haven't got a grave number for Peter. We do have his wife Ellen at 274. Now, if we look here, we have got 284, we've got 283 and 282. So if we backtrack, 280, 278, oh sorry, 279, as Vicky just got me there. I always go in twos. 279, 278 I would say, 77, 76, 75, somewhere around here is, I think, 274. So here is roughly where we believe Ellen Caygill lies. And as you can see, there's nothing to show, as in life, there's nothing to show in death, where Ellen Caygill is now put to rest, put to sleep, or at sleep I should say. It's a shame really, because like you said, she had such a rough life. Now I'm not saying she didn't love her husband and she didn't love her kids, and she probably would have done anything to protect them all, but at the end of the day they made her life hell for, like I said, nearly 40 years. And when she sadly passed away in 1897 under such tragic circumstances, and like I said, accidents happen every day, don't they? I mean, young and old, we slip on things, we trip over things, and in poor Ellen's case it led to her death. Something as trivial as slipping on orange peels, but it was bad enough to break a leg and, you know, suffer a seriously fractured skull, and it ended her life. But here she is, Ellen Caygill. Now the death itself came as a big shock to the community of Rawtenstall, Newchurch, obviously Waterfoot, because obviously a lot of people knew Ellen Caygill, and especially the Kegel clan. An inquest took place, I think it was on Friday the 18th of June, but it was a quick inquest, and I think it was Mr. Aitken who sat in the chair, and he obviously went through it so quickly. I think it was about a 10-minute inquest into the death of Ellen Caygill, and ultimately the end result would have been that she died accidentally. It was an accident waiting to happen basically, and that was it. There was nothing else. There was no apologies to the Kegel family or nothing. It was part and parcel of life as a hawker, I guess, working in the streets, in the old alleyways, the pathways. It was just one of those situations, and back in Victorian days, that was it. No apologies, no compensation, nothing. Now, the time being, Frank and another son called George, they went off the rails even more. They would be seen in the bars, they'd be fighting, they'd be robbing people, they would be convicted, they would be sent to jail for 1 month, hard labour. But eventually as time went by, and after the mother's death, 6 months, 12 months later, the Kegel clan and all the stories, it seemed to disperse. Things seemed to calm down. The father had died, the mother had died. They had no backup, they didn't have that safety net of a parent behind them. Even though they're adults themselves, they had nobody to fall back on. So over the years, the stories of the Kegels seemed to dispense, and it became part and parcel of what I would class as notoriety here in Newchurch, and like I said, Rawtenstall, Bacup and nearby towns and villages. But as for poor Ellen, she suffered 30, 40 years, not physical abuse, more mental and emotional abuse, all because of her family. She was the one who was trying to keep everything together, keep her family together, but yet her sons were letting her down, her husband let her down on many occasions, you know. But this poor lady, she was out hawking to make ends meet, to try and keep a roof over her head and one of her sons' head. It's a sad story, but it's just one of many similar stories that me and Vicky have come across here near where we live. And I guess these type of stories also take place back where you guys are from. You know, it's not an uncommon occurrence. Women especially turn into hawking on the streets when they lose their loved ones and they lose the support of the family. And it was better than going in the workhouses. The workhouses were absolutely horrendous places to be associated with. So Ellen, she chose the next best option, and like I said, that was hawking. You know, that was her going out in the early hours of the morning, carrying heavy baskets of fruits and vegetables, just to earn a few pennies to pay for the rent, to keep a roof over her head. And I keep saying that, but that is what it was all about. That is what it's about nowadays, isn't it, when we go to work? It's about putting food on the table, maintaining the house, keeping the roof over your head. And that is what poor Ellen had resorted to. And let's bear in mind as well, she was 69 years old, so she wasn't a spring chicken. She was a frail lady by all accounts, and yet she was lumbering these heavy baskets around with her every morning on her own, putting herself at harm, putting herself at risk. And ultimately it was an orange peel or orange peels that would ultimately lead to her death. Now, how amazing are these steps? Obviously not in use anymore, gates are locked at the top, but just imagine 100 years ago, congregation walking down as they made their way into St Nicholas's Church. Like I say, history right on the feet, and I said this many times in videos. And I'll tell you what has spotted my eye when I first came in. It's this massive headstone incorporated into the wall. So I'm presuming this was a family of importance. William Buckley, who died January 30th, 1904, aged 69, also Harriet's wife. She died January 20th, 1911, 77 years. And children of the above, George W., who died March 31st, 1864, in his first year. Sarah Ann, who died July 15th, 1875, in her 15th year. And Mary E., who died August 2nd, 1879, in her 3rd year. Charles M., who died, I think it's November 12th, 1886, in his 20th year. So it's obviously, I would presume, a wealthy or obviously an important family in these parts, because it is a big headstone, like I said, incorporated into the wall. Now, while we're here at St Nicholas in Newchurch, I've always wanted to see this headstone of this dog. And I like how somebody's left a little bit of a stick there. Nice touch. But it says, sacred to the memory of Old Thu, or is it Methuselah or Methuselah Yates, died 27th of February 1864, aged 78 years. He was a huntsman of harriers for 50 years. 5 and 20 of high were with the Rosendale hunt. But yeah, I've seen this many a time on photographs and in other videos, and I've never seen it in person until today. Now, interestingly, just as we're about to leave this location, we've come across this old war memorial. And if you see, D.F. Kegel, East Lancashire Regiment, 11th November 1918. 241754 Private, D.F. Kegel. Now, that is quite odd, especially surnames such as Kegel. I am going to go on, I'm going to look this gentleman up and see if perhaps the sons or the daughter Jane of Peter and Ellen may have had children themselves who may have passed away in 1918 or buried here in 1918, the First World War. Because, like I say, you've got D.F. Kegel, and we know Ellen is located just somewhere around here. So that, being Kegel, the surnames, I wouldn't say it's a standard surname. Yeah, I mean, that's quite interesting. So we'll look that up, and anything we find, we'll either put a screen up or we'll put some writers up down below of this person if they are indeed related to Ellen and Peter Kegel. So that's it from St Nicholas here in Newchurch, and the sad tale of Ellen Caygill and the terrorised neighbourhood of Newchurch and Waterfoot, and the Kegel family that once caused so much heartache and horror in these places. Now, if you enjoyed this type of story, it is a quick story, this one today, but if you did enjoy this story, comment down below, tell me your thoughts. Do you have people in your neck of the woods, even to this day, that are notorious and people that you won't like to see and bump into in a pub, in an inn, you know, getting on the wrong side of? Like I said, I won't name the two who I was brought up with, because I'm not sure if they're still here. But if you did enjoy this story, don't forget to give us a big thumbs up, don't forget to comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Also, please share this video. We have now broken the 1,000 subscriber barrier, and we do appreciate every single subscriber. We're absolutely amazed we actually hit over 1,000 subscribers. It means so much to me and Vicky. But in the meantime, guys, as I always say, take care, look after yourselves, and we'll be back soon with another tale from our dark but glorious past. Take care, guys.